election day, or that they are not required to count votes that are, which was it? Because it makes a difference. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't have the ruling right in front of me right now.
Either way, I don't think that the court has, because the Constitution states that or provides that the states will run their own elections. The only thing the states are obligated to is to certify their vote with their electors on the appointed date as determined by Congress in the statute. That's the only thing the states are required to do for the federal government. The federal government and the Supreme Court have no damn business.
Here's I read Kavanaugh's concurrence this morning. I read it like 3 hours ago, and like I said, I don't remember every word. But and I don't know if you've read it, but it's a fairly straightforward read. And basically, my understanding of what he's saying is the legislature, the Constitution says that the individual legislatures of the individual states shall determine time and place of elections and methods. And that in Wisconsin, the legislature did not say votes that arrive after Election Day that are postmarked before Election Day may be counted. It was not the legislature. It was a state. It was a judge, or a court. I don't recall if it was the state Supreme Court or if it was a federal judge or state judge, but which judge it was. But it was a judge. And what Kavanaugh was saying is judges don't have that power. Only the legislature has that power. And I can't blow a hole in that, Paul. Can you?
The legislature says, well, I don't know what the Wisconsin legislature says about how these votes would be counted, but I don't think that Brett Kavanaugh
hasn't said. That's the problem. The law in Wisconsin does not provide. I mean, absentee balloting, absentee voting is a relatively recent thing in a lot of states, and apparently the Wisconsin law does not say that votes can be counted after Election Day, that they have to arrive by Election Day. That's what the law says. And the judge came along and said, because of the coronavirus, we need to extend this. And I don't believe the judge cited the sabotage of the post office, but I would point that out also. And what Kavanaugh and the Supreme Court said was, you can't make law. And that's not an unreasonable position, Paul, if that's really what it's all about.
But we also have the issue of the federal government through the United States Post Office not delivering votes that were cast by the day that they're supposed to be there.
I'm with you, although I don't think that was in the original arguments. From based on what I read this morning.
What I want to get to, Tom, because we'll go, you and I will go on forever, but what I'm getting to, the caller you had yesterday, and with Stephanie, was saying that, well, Mitch McConnell didn't break the law in not holding hearings for Merrick Garland. And my point is that it's not a matter of law. The Constitution isn't a law. The Constitution is a charter for the law. It's the operating system. It's not the applications. It's not the programs.
Actually, according to the Marbury decision, it is the law. And that's that. I mean, in the Marbury decision, what John Marshall said was that Article 3, Section 2, that says that the Supreme Court shall have jurisdiction as to facts and law. He said that, so therefore we get to interpret what the law means when there's ambiguity or dispute. And that the law that we also can interpret is the law which is the Constitution. It's the highest law of the land. Marshall came right out and essentially said that. I don't know that he said it in those words, but that was the essence of the Marbury decision in 1803.
Okay, well then let's go this way. When Mitch McConnell decided not to hold hearings for Merrick Garland, he didn't hold hearings, and the Constitution says that the Senate shall give advice and consent on appointing judges. So if they did not hold hearings, that means they neither consented nor declined. And in that case, in every other kind of law, if you don't show up for the hearing, you waive your right that you might have exercised in that hearing. So Barack Obama could have, and who would have stopped him from saying, oh, well, then I'm seating Merrick Garland on the court. And then Ruth Bader Ginsburg could have retired and said, I'm seating a replacement for her on the court. Who's going to say no? Is John Roberts going to say, oh, no, we're not going to seat her? Is John Roberts then going to be the one to say, we're not going to seat her, but I'm going to be the doorkeeper of who's going to sit on my court? He can't do
I think he would, Paul. He would say that this is an extra constitutional process. There has to be advice and consent by the Senate.
but they declined. They declined to do that. So what I'm
they
saying
declined
is,
for the moment.
What I'm getting to. Wait, here's what I'm getting to, Tom, is that, and you've quoted it very well.
10 seconds, Paul.
1832, Worcester versus Georgia, when Andrew Jackson said, John Marshall's made his decision, let him enforce it. Joe Biden can refuse to even enforce any Supreme Court decisions. That's what it's coming to if you start skirting the process the way Mitch McConnell started.
I think you may well be right, Paul. You may well be right. And I think we're heading into some very interesting times here. Paul, thank you for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And now, by the way, Donald Trump is threatening Pennsylvania. Seriously. I'll tell you about it after the break, and we'll pick up your phone calls, too. And welcome back. Helen in Fairmont, West Virginia. Helen, been a while since I've heard from you. I hope you are well.
Not really, but I'm listening to you still. I'm enjoying every minute of it. But so I wanted to say that the Supreme Court is supposed to be composed of non-wise men and women. I don't think that's the case anymore. Because of the Hobby Lobby decision, I think that was a terrible decision. I don't think somebody's religion should be imposed on their employees if they're a business, doing business with the public. Number two, the Citizens United was a horrible thing. And number three, this new judge, Amy Coney Barrett. I have no faith in her at all. And I started getting calls yesterday from pro-life organizations, getting these phone calls, and I hate that because I'm pro-choice. Mm-hmm. And so I think they made horrible decisions in the past, and they're going to make a lot more of them in the future. And I know exactly how she will vote on abortion if they try to overturn that.
Oh, yeah.
And
then it goes to the states, and then we get to have, if they overturn Roe, it might not be the worst thing to happen, actually, Helen, because, right now in Italy, I believe it is, I'd have to go back. No, it's in Poland. Day before yesterday in Poland, there was a massive street demonstration. I retweeted a video of it yesterday. This massive street demonstration in Poland because the Polish government is trying to ban abortion, which was banned up until about 15, 20 years ago. And now it's been legalized. And people just turned out in the streets. And I think that if the Supreme Court gives up on this issue and says we're no longer going to require states to allow abortion, it's going to go to the states, and you're going to start seeing real debates on a real issue here. And women are starting to stand up, and male allies of women are starting to stand up with them. And we're seeing, even among Catholic voters and Republican voters, majorities who believe a woman should have the right to choose whether or not to have an abortion, that police and legislators should not be inserted between a woman and her physician. And, sometimes these things are blessings in disguise, Helen.
I don't know, but what I hope for is an honest Supreme Court instead of a Trump Supreme Court, because I think they'll vote any way he wants to. And I don't understand why everyone's so afraid of him. I mean, there are no principles left in the Senate. And I remember Mitch McConnell says his main objective was to make sure Obama was a one-term president. They lost that. Yep. But I can't, I don't know what the Republican Party even stands for anymore. It certainly doesn't stand for the people.
Oh, I can tell you, Helen, the Republican Party stands for bigotry, billionaires, and big corporations. The three Bs. Ellen, thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. In our special video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, the one today is for anybody who has any connection, or for this week, anybody who has any connection with the military or anybody in the military who might still think that Donald Trump is a good guy. And I'm going through I don't know how many, 20, 30, 40, 50 individual data points of times when Trump has trashed our troops, when Trump has deported troops, when Trump has deported military spouses who aren't citizens, when Trump has lied to our troops, when Trump has, specifically pulled money from our troops. I mean, he took money out of military housing, which is in some parts of the country, mold infested and really in a crisis, to build his border wall that Mexico is supposed to pay for. As just one example. So there's a whole list of these things in that new video that's available over at thomhartmann.com, especially for anybody you know who has any consideration or concern at all for our U.S. military. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Nick in Chicago. Hey, Nick, what's on your mind today?
Taking my call. I'm really glad you brought up the 6 senators because it kind of ties into what I was going to point out. There was an editorial in the Chicago Sun-Times posted last night after Barrett's confirmation was going out. And I'll give you the TLDR version. It basically says...
Okay, hang on just a second, Nick. I didn't know if you were going to speak very briefly or not, but you're apparently not going to speak very briefly. It sounds like you're talking to us from inside the toilet. Would you please put the microphone next to your mouth so that I can hear what you're saying?
AirPods. How's that better? Is that better?
That's a good point.
So the TLDR version. Sorry.
Nick, I'm going to put you on hold, and we'll let you and Joyce figure this out. Don in Sheridan, Iowa. Hey, Don, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi, Tom. I was watching, I don't know if it was CNN or news program. I believe he's an Afro guy. He's a Harvard graduate, older, but he's got the wild hair. The horse piled up high, whatever you want to call it. It's not wild. But anyway, he was talking about we need to add more justices, and we're not packing the court. We need to make the court more fair and just so that we don't have to worry about this happening down with the Supreme Court. And I like that idea. What do you think is what I was wanting to know?
Me too. Well, back in 1937, when Franklin Roosevelt wanted to expand the court, he had broad popular support for that. He ended up not doing it. This whole phrase "packing the court" was one that the Republicans used to attack him with, but it was a straw, argument. And so, I think that the court should be expanded. Frankly, I think it should go to 15 justices. Most likely, it will go to 11 if it gets expanded. They'll take it small increments, but originally there were 6 justices because there would be 2 for each of the 3 circuits. And, as we expanded the court, as we expanded the country, we slowly expanded the court. But, I think back in those days, the justices on the court also rode what was called riding the circuit. And, they no longer do that. They don't do double duty as the, head of the local circuit, or of their local circuit court. So we'll see. We'll see. Don, thanks. Vor, am I saying that right in Albuquerque? VOIR?
Hello. Vor? Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
What happens if Trump runs again and in 2024 and, there's just an uprising against Obama again? That's what this whole thing's about. There's I never understood that that the uprising against a black president would be so much. And here we are.
Oh, it's been huge.
And now we have Trump.
And this is the thing that the media doesn't acknowledge, is that an awful lot of the power behind Trump was basically the white racist vote who was freaked out that there was a black man in the White House.
And they've been screwed over by the Republicans the whole time. And I don't understand why. And the thing is, see, this is why we have to hold, if Biden wins, we have to hold him accountable. We have to, we have to hold him accountable, too.
We have to push him, and we also have to have his back.
Yes.
I'm completely with you, Vor. I am absolutely with you. Thanks for the call. Nick in Chicago, you want to try it again this time? Straight, doing it right here? What's up?
Sorry about that. But anyways, I wanted to get to the Chicago Sun-Times editorial I was talking about. And the basic version is this. The Barrett confirmation stinks, yes. But Democrats shouldn't be stacking it with at least 15 justices. Otherwise, they're going to overplay their hand. So what they suggest from a University of Chicago law professor is take it to 11 justices, but then also add term limits. And I can kind of see where he's going with that, because I'm just thinking long ball here. If we get overzealous and overplay our hand, those 6 seats you mentioned, we might not be able to pick them up. Plus that, you got Rand Paul in Indiana where Pete Buttigieg can run. You might have a big take for senators on the Democrat side. So I think I don't like pointing that out, because I know everybody's mad, but I think it's a reasonable position to take. What do you think?
Expanding the court and doing term limits, adding 2 justices and having term limits.
Because if you think about that, he suggested 18
I think those are
term
reasonable
limits.
steps.
Because
Elizabeth Warren was using this as a talking point during the Democratic primary, and I think she's absolutely right. And Nick, I think you are too. Nick, thank you for the call and for getting the phone right there. We'll be back. Got a really fascinating story coming up about the role that psychedelics may have played in the origin and founding of Christianity. This is incredible little bit of geeky science, and then we'll get back to politics and continue talking about everything that's going on.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. More info at teethhealth.com, code Tom. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code Tom. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, it's Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power by Pam Grossman. This is from the introduction. Witches have always walked among us, populating societies and storyscapes across the globe for thousands of years. From Circe to Hermione, from Morgan Le Fay to Marie Laveau, the witch has long existed in the tales we tell about ladies with strange powers who can harm or heal. And although people of all genders have been considered witches, it's a word that is now usually associated with women. Throughout most of history, she has someone to fear, an uncanny other who threatens our safety or manipulates reality for her own mercurial purposes. She's a pariah, a persona non grata, a boogie woman to defeat and discard. Although she's often been deemed a destructive entity, in actuality, a witchy woman has historically been far more susceptible to attack than an inflictor of violence herself. As with other terrifying outsiders, she occupies a paradoxical role in cultural consciousness as both vicious aggressor and vulnerable prey. Over the past 150 years or so, however, the witch has done another magic trick by turning from a fright into a figure of inspiration. She is now as likely to be the heroine of your favorite TV show as she is its villain. She might show up in the form of your Wiccan co-worker or the beloved musician who gives off a sorceress vibe in videos or on stage. There's also a chance that she is you, and that witch is an identity you've taken upon yourself for any number of reasons, heartfelt or flippant, public or private. Today, more women than ever are choosing the way of the witch, whether literally or symbolically. They're floating down catwalks and sidewalks in gauzy black clothing and adorning themselves with Pinterest-worthy pentagrams and crystals. They're filling up movie theaters to watch witchy films and gathering in back rooms and backyards to do rituals, consult tarot cards, and set life-altering intentions. They're marching in the streets with Hex the Patriarchy placards and casting spells each month to try to constrain the commander-in-chief. Year after year, articles keep proclaiming it's the season of the witch, as journalists try to wrap their heads around the mushrooming witch trend. And all of this begs the question, why? Why do witches matter? Why are they seemingly everywhere right now? What exactly are they? And why the hell won't they go away? I get asked such things over and over, and you would think that after a lifetime of studying and writing about witches, as well as hosting a witch-themed podcast and being a practitioner of witchcraft myself, my answers would be succinct. In fact, I find that the more I work with the witch, the more complex she becomes. Hers is a slippery spirit. Try to pin her down and she'll only recede further into the dark, deep wood. I do know this for sure, though. Show me your witches, and I'll show you your feelings about women. The fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time is no coincidence. The two are reflections of each other. That said, this current witch wave is nothing new. I was a teen in the 1990s, the decade that brought us such pop culture as Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Charmed, and The Craft, not to mention riot girls and third-wave feminists who taught me that female power could come in a variety of colors and sexualities. I learned that women could lead a revolution while wearing lipstick and combat boots, and sometimes even a cloak. But my own witchly awakening came at an even earlier age. Morganville, New Jersey, where I was raised, was a solidly suburban town, but it retained enough natural land features back then to still feel a little bit scruffy in spots. We had a small patch of woods in our backyard that abutted a horse farm, and the two were separated by a wisp of running water that we could cross via a plank of wood. When we were little, my older sister Emily and I would sometimes venture to the other side where we could feed the horses, an act that still scares me to this day, and pick fistfuls of clover. But the majority of our time was spent on our side of the stream, threading ourselves through the thicket of trees that served as our personal forest. In one corner of the yard, a giant puddle would form whenever it rained, surrounded by a border of ferns. We called this spot our magical place. That it would vanish and then reappear only added to its mystery. It was a portal to the unknown. These woods are where I first remember doing magic, entering that state of deep play where imaginative action becomes reality. I would spend hours out there creating rituals with rocks and sticks, drawing secret symbols in the dirt, losing all track of time. It was a space that felt holy and wild, yet still strangely safe. As we age, we're supposed to stop filling our heads with such nonsense. Unicorns are to be traded in for Barbie dolls, though both are mythical creatures to be sure. We lose our tooth fairies, walk away from our wizards. Dragons get slain on the altar of our youth. Most kids grow out of their magic phase. I grew further into mine. My grandma Trudy was a librarian at the West Long Branch Library, which meant I got to spend many a long afternoon lurking between the 001.9 and 135 Dewey Decimal sections, reading about Bigfoot and dream interpretation in Nostradamus. Waking the Witch by Pam Grossman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Brian Muraresku. He's a practicing lawyer, practicing international law, and the author of a book, The Immortality Key. BrianMuraresku.com is his website. It's spelled Muraresku.com, and that's also his Twitter handle, Brian Muraresku. Brian, this fascinating hypothesis that psychedelics played a role in the creation of what we today know as modern Christianity. What started you digging into this?
Great to be here, Tom. So this is not my theory. I was a useless major in Latin and Greek and Sanskrit as an undergrad at Brown, and thought I was going to be either a priest or some kind of professional philosopher for the rest of my life, but wound up going to law school. And at the back of my mind stuck this idea of the best kept secret in history. At least that's what Houston Smith called it, one of the greatest religious scholars of the 20th century. And it came back on my radar, this concept of an ancient psychedelic sacrament, in 2007 when I was reading some of the first studies that were coming out of Johns Hopkins University about psilocybin, the active compound in so-called magic mushrooms. And what I was reading are testimonies from people, 2/3 of which were saying that it was the most meaningful experience of their entire lives, this one and only dose of psilocybin. It's strikingly similar to the kind of testimony that survives from Eleusis in ancient Greece, which welcomed everybody from Plato to Marcus Aurelius, this life-transforming event that erased the fear of death and guaranteed them an afterlife.
Well, having used psychedelics as a teenager, I can tell you it was a life-altering experience for me. And certainly we have a lot of associations between, what we would refer to as pagan, pre-Christian religions, and things like, Santa Claus being basically a psychedelic mushroom, the Amanita mushroom, the red and white, and the flying reindeer, and the reindeer had to process this through their urine and all that. But that's all way post-foundational Christianity. That's, the contamination of Christianity in more modern times, certainly in the last 1,000 years, by indigenous people. You talk about the sacrament. Do you think that people were like passing out magic mushrooms? Here's the body of Christ, or spiked wine. Here's the blood of Christ.
I think there's a possibility that there was spiked wine in the ancient world. As a matter of fact, I spent the past 12 years looking for the scientific evidence. So all these wonky ideas from John Allegro in the 1970s and this trio of renegades, Gordon Wasson, Albert Hofmann, who synthesizes LSD, obviously, and Carl Ruck at Boston University. In 1978, they released this idea that the ancient Greeks were using drugs to find God, and maybe they passed it on to the first Christians. But what inspired me in the wake of these psilocybin trials in 2007, 2008, was to look for more scientific data. So in addition to all this psychopharmacological data, I started digging into these old journals in archaeobotany and archaeochemistry. And it's this relatively new science where people are going out and digging into these excavations and finding chalices, testing them chemically to see what was in there. And what you find time and again are ancient specimens of wine that were in fact spiked with different plants and herbs. And sometimes they're very innocuous. But at other times, I found this one find dated to 79 AD, for example, where the wine was spiked with opium, cannabis, henbane, and black nightshade. At the right dose, pretty visionary stuff.
Yeah, and nightshade, with the belladonna and the atropine in it, will produce a vivid hallucinatory state. That's fascinating. What have you seen? The evidence is increasingly large that psychedelics can be powerful therapeutic tools for things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in fact, here in Oregon, one of the things that's on our ballot that we voted on this just last week, when we mailed our ballots in, was whether to legalize psilocybin in this state. And of course, it would take a federal change, but I'm guessing that's going to be coming. Are you seeing any kind of a trend among people who identify as Christians? I know that there are some folks who don't identify as Christians who openly, actively use these psychedelic substances as sacraments, both some Native American groups and some neo-pagan groups and whatnot. But within Christianity, established Christianity, in the United States or around the world, do you see any move back toward psychoactive substances?
It's interesting. In this country, it's impossible to forecast where this is going to go. But it's worth pointing out some of these traditions already exist in some Christian sects. If you think of the Santo Daime in Brazil, for example, kind of a syncretic blend of this ayahuasca church as their sacrament. Exactly, ayahuasca with their version of Christianity. And that's really what my book is about. I mean, just as today you can go around the world and find 33,000 denominations of Christianity, I think that was the case from the very beginning, and there were always these alternative Eucharists. Now, are those to be incorporated in some kind of modern psychedelic church? I don't know, but I know with the FDA getting involved in some of these clinical trials and what's happening in Oregon, it's going to be a very exciting next 10 years to see how this all develops.
Yeah, the feds are doing some of this too, isn't the Veterans Administration experimenting with psychedelics, or is it a different group that's working with veterans with PTSD?
I think so. Yeah, we have some MDMA trials that are now headed to phase 2, phase 3, looking at PTSD, and there's a number of trials already in phase 2, largely with psilocybin, looking at everything from anxiety, depression, to end-of-life distress. And there's a really interesting crossover there. If you think about palliative care, for example, people who are suffering at the end of life, these single-dose interventions, and in particular, the mystical experience that happens in these experiments is directly correlated with the depths of the healthy outcome. People see a reduction in anxiety and depression from just a single intervention. And, the line between one person's psychology and one person's spirituality seems to be getting thinner. And so it'll be interesting to see in 5 to 10 years what becomes of all this research.
Yeah, it is starting to pop up in, what's the word? It's not palliative care. Hospice care, in end-of-life treatments. I remember when my father was dying, and how much I wished I could share psychedelics with him. In fact, I proposed that to him when I was 16. He was not amused. That was 1967. But, one of the reports that I'm hearing is that people who are gravely ill, who know that they're on death's door, who try psychedelics, find that their fear of death goes away. Is that a consistent thing across the literature, Brian?
It seems to be fairly consistent, and the whole reason I dug into this mystery, because again, it reminded me of the kind of testimony from the ancient world where someone like Plato claimed to have witnessed, right? There's a vision of this mystery that obliterates the fear of death and transforms you into an immortal. I mean, in some of these more modern experiments, I talked to a woman named Dinah Baser, by the way, who participated in the NYU experiment. They published this joint finding with Hopkins in 2016, particularly about cancer patients receiving psilocybin. Dinah Baser, one of these volunteers, describes her one and only dose as being bathed in God's love. Now she's an atheist, but she has this deeply life-transforming mystical experience, and it's just going to be so interesting to see where this goes.
Yeah, that was absolutely my experience as a teenager, and it has never left me. You know, and I'm pushing 70 here, so I'm with you. Brian Muraresku. Brian, Muraresku.com is the website and the Twitter handle. Brian, thanks, and the book is The Immortality Key. Brian, thanks for dropping by.
Thanks so much, Tom.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Robert in Seal Beach, California. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. The Amy Coney, what's called
Island?
Yes. I was telling your wife, I just really believe now that Pelosi, Joe Biden, and if we take the Senate, which looks like we're going to take the Senate, we have no choice. We have to pack the court. Because if Joe Biden does not do it, everything that they come up with, if it goes to the Supreme Court, they're going to shoot it down. And I mean,
I think they're going to try and take apart Social Security and Medicare. But Robert, I think we need to change our language. Instead of saying we need to pack the court, we need to say we're going to unpack the court.
True. I mean, I just believe a lot of Dems have that freeze moment. Like, should we do it? No, we have customs and we have a right way of doing things. The Republicans aren't playing by rules. And the only way, as a football term, sometimes you got to throw the rule book out and got to do what you got to do. And I think the time has come where we got to do what we got to do.
Yeah, I'm with you, Robert. And Chuck Schumer yesterday said to the, when Amy Coney Barrett was installed in the ceremony last night in the White House, Chuck Schumer said to his Senate colleagues, you guys have, I'm paraphrasing from memory here, you guys have surrendered any possible credibility if we take control of the Senate in your efforts to tell us how to run the damn Senate. And I am so with him on that. Robert, thank you for the call. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Well, I just, I don't see how expanding the court to 11 does us any good. You still got a 6-5 majority of conservatives. It has to go to 13.
Okay. I don't disagree with you. I just don't. I doubt that they will have the courage, shall we say, to do that without resorting.
And this is why the Democrats always lose, because they don't have the cojones to do what's necessary.
Well, they don't always lose. I mean, we got civil rights legislation, we got voting rights legislation, we got Medicare, we got Social Security, we got unemployment benefits. The Democrats have won a lot of things. It's just been a long time. We arguably got, Obamacare, but it was still a big gift to the insurance companies. It's been a long time since, basically the last time Democrats actually behaved like Democrats was during the Lyndon Johnson administration. And setting aside the Vietnam War, he got a lot done with the Great Society. And hopefully, yeah, I know. And because what happened was, the Reagan came in and destroyed the unions, and there was no funding for the Democratic Party left by 1992. And so Bill Clinton said, well, let's bring in the corporations and the billionaires, at least the reasonable ones. We'll go with the banks and insurance companies instead of the polluting steel industry or the chemical industry. And it was the Democratic Party sold its soul. Well, what Bernie Sanders proved to us back, in 2000, I would say in 2008, arguably, Barack Obama certainly showed us, but certainly in 2016 was that you no longer need billionaires and big corporations to finance a campaign. You do, however, have a problem with the media. But Mark, I'm with you. It's time to take names and kick ass. And I guarantee you the Democrats will not do that if we don't push them. I mean, our work on this program and right across the board, all of our activism, we can't just say, hey, I voted and just go home. Our work really begins after the election. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. It's astonishing. Just think about this. This year alone, with this one source of revenue, according to Senator Bernie Sanders, quote, this year alone, we could fund tuition-free college for all, eliminate child hunger, ensure clean drinking water for every American household, build 500,000 affordable housing units, provide face masks for everybody, produce the protective gear and medical supplies our health workers need for the pandemic, and fully fund the U.S. Post Office. Now, what is this magical thing that we could do that would produce enough money to do all these things? Fund the Internal Revenue Service. Republicans have cut its funding so badly since 2010 that fully a third of their enforcement is no longer happening. And tax cheats have walked off, or they're basically refusing to pay over $260 billion in taxes this year. You can hear the whole thing over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. A couple of points that I want to, or one point, I guess, in particular that I want to make. I mentioned this briefly yesterday, but I think it bears restating because we need to be preparing for this right now. And, you know, I know that the Democratic Party has lawyers and all this kind of stuff, and I brought this up with Tom Perez a couple of times. You know, what happens if they try to go all 12th Amendment on you? And he's like, don't worry, we got lawyers and everything. But Brett Kavanaugh all but pulled out a bullhorn yesterday to say, if this court is asked to decide this election in favor of Donald Trump, we are more than prepared to do it. Now, obviously, he didn't use those words, but in his decision, which contained mistakes and errors and outright lies, to justify his decision that, his part in the decision that Wisconsin ballots, even if they're postmarked before Election Day, should not be counted. And by the way, what this tells us is that really nationwide, today is the last, if you're going to vote by mail, today is the last day. Don't even think about voting by mail after today. And we're a week out. And Louis DeJoy and Donald Trump have done their best to screw the post office. They have destroyed over 600 of these multi-million-dollar sorting machines that can sort 30,000 pieces of mail a minute, and replace them with individual human beings who can count 30,000 pieces of mail in a week. I don't know the actual numbers, but you get my point. So, you know, I would say, just speaking for myself, I'm not, not the Democratic Party or anybody else, but, you know, if you're voting by mail, you better be done by now. And if you're not, physically take that ballot, even if it's an absentee ballot, a mail ballot, you can physically take it to your local elections office or to where the votes are being collected or counted. You might want to call first and check how it works in your state. But where I was going with this, and the point that I want to make, is that if Trump and the Republicans, and if Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell had said, we are going to wait until after the election to install Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court so that she can destroy Obamacare and the right of a woman to have an abortion in the United States. And she's made it very clear that those two things are on her radar screen. She's written about them. If Mitch McConnell had waited until after the election, there are probably tens to hundreds of thousands and perhaps even millions of single-issue anti-abortion voters who would have showed up to vote for Donald Trump and Republicans in the Senate because they were worried that, you know, we got to make sure Amy Coney Barrett gets on the bench because, you know, we want to end abortion. And they would have come out to vote. But now that McConnell has put Barrett on the court, you've got maybe millions of these anti-abortion Republican voters who are going to say, why bother? I'm kind of ambivalent about Donald Trump. He hasn't done a good job with the coronavirus. He's kind of a bozo. You know, I really just wanted him there to make abortion illegal or to end Obamacare. And, you know, he's already set that in place. So why vote? So two things come out of this. If you think about this logically for a minute, just think about it like as an election strategist or as a Republican voter who is concerned about ending Obamacare or ending the right of a woman to have an abortion. Why on God's green earth would Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump say we've got to install this woman on the Supreme Court before the election, when installing her after the election would virtually guarantee that a lot of people who are anti-abortion would show up to vote? They're not going to show up to vote now. So why would they take the risk of essentially shooting themselves in the foot like this with these single-issue voters, of giving them what they want before the election and then coming out and saying, but please vote for me, I gave you what you want? Maybe you've got a better answer to this than I do. But when I look at this situation, when I look at and this is strategic. This is a lot of thought went into this, a lot of, this is serious decision-making stuff by Mitch McConnell. And I can only see two possible reasons. Number one, either Mitch McConnell is gravely ill, and there was this whole thing around, why are his hands purple and why does he have bandages all over the backs of them? And he's got a bruise on his face. Maybe he fell down the stairs, or it may be that he has COVID, or maybe he's on blood thinner. God only knows. But either Mitch McConnell is so sick that he doesn't think he's going to make it for a couple more weeks to gavel the Senate in and ran this through. Or they're packing the court right now. They want to get Amy Coney Barrett on the court now instead of 2 weeks from now, not because of abortion, not because of Obamacare, but because they're expecting the court to decide who's going to be the next president. And Trump has come out and said this, by the way. It was about 3 weeks ago in one of his rallies. He hasn't said it again. I think it was, one of those famous slip of the tongues. But Trump has come out and said this. This is going to go to the Supreme Court. We got to get Barrett on that court. Can you come up with any other reason?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And if that's the case, if what they're all planning on doing is revisiting the 2000 election and giving another popular vote loser the White House, how do we respond?
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough that 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
The Hidden History of the War on Voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. So we've had a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program. It's about 2 people you probably never heard of, Isabel Cairo and Jay Sim. They are economists with the Federal Reserve, and they just came out with this extraordinary new paper. It was actually published by the Fed, in which they point out that most of the economic crises and problems that we're experiencing in the United States, going back to the 1980s, the stagnation in wages, the actual drop in wages, the stagnation in household income as more and more people in households are working, the explosion in the net worth of the top 5% of households, things that are driving, credit bubbles and other, stock bubbles and things like this. A dramatic amount of that was the result of monopoly power, corporate monopoly power, and about half of that could have been eliminated if we simply taxed unearned income. It's amazing. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. I mentioned earlier, and I'll just fill in the hole here because I didn't finish. Donald Trump was threatening Pennsylvania. He's specifically threatening Pennsylvanians because their governor, Tom Wolf, is a Democrat. And in his rally in Pennsylvania yesterday, he said, "So, Tom Wolf, next time, give us a little notice, Governor." He says, your governor made it almost impossible for us to find any site for this event. And I'll remember it, Tom. I'm going to remember it, Tom. Hello, Mr. President. This is Governor Wolf. I need help. I need help. You know what? These people are bad. In other words, Donald Trump, because the governor of Pennsylvania had put a limit on the size of gatherings, which Trump ignored. Wolf wants it to be a limit of 250 people, and Trump was like, no, we're not going to do that. And Trump also said Wolf had shut down the whole Commonwealth, which is a lie. And Trump says, and all these restrictions that Democrats are putting in place, they're all going to be lifted the day after the election, which we all know is a lie and is patent nonsense because these restrictions have to do with keeping people from dying, preventing hospitals from being overwhelmed, as is happening right now in red state after red state after red state. But here's Donald Trump threatening the citizens of Pennsylvania with not getting federal assistance because they've got a Democratic governor who's trying to keep them healthy. And he thinks this is a winning electoral strategy. This is the thing that just, boggles my mind. Anyway, Bob in Flossmoor, Illinois. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hi. I'm right in the middle of listening to a biography on Audible of George Washington, and I just recently came to the place where in 1789 he's just started his presidency, and he's appointed John Jay as Chief Justice. But I was surprised. I've not read your book on the topic, and I'm sure you cover it very thoroughly, but Chief Justice of what? There's almost nothing about the judiciary branch in the Constitution, and there is no he's not Chief Justice of the Supreme Court because there is no Supreme Court mentioned in the Constitution. And so
actually there is. It's in Article 3, Section 2. It names the Supreme Court. It establishes that they have original jurisdiction in foreign disputes and interstate disputes, and they have appellate jurisdiction on matters of law, criminal and civil. But the Supreme Court did not exist as a result of the Constitution. What the Constitution did is it authorized Congress to create the Supreme Court, which Congress did in 1789.
Right. So all this talk about like there's some sacred number of Supreme Court justices is totally, a myth.
It's nonsense.
And John Jay was overwhelmed when he took the job and needed help. And so, the Judiciary Act of 1789 was passed, and that set up the Supreme Court with 6 justices at that time. And I don't know how many times it changed between then.
Oh, I can tell you. That was 1789. You had 6 justices. And rather than going through it all, yes, it's changed a bunch of times. John Adams shrank it. Thomas Jefferson expanded it. During the Andrew Johnson presidency, it was shrunk by Congress because they didn't want him to put anybody on. When Ulysses Grant became president, they expanded it again. Abraham Lincoln expanded it to 10 just because he could. He just wanted to get one more anti-slavery, justice on the Supreme Court. So he simply said to Congress, "Hey, let's expand the court to 10." Okay, sure, and they did. It actually went up to 10.
Yeah.
And then after he was assassinated, they cut it down to 7. And then after Johnson left office, they took it back to 9, and which is where it's stayed ever since. But yeah, it's whatever Congress wants. Article 3, Section 2 says that the Supreme Court shall operate under regulations defined by Congress, and those regulations include how many members of the Supreme Court there are. But that's great, Bob. I'm so glad you're getting your American history, and George Washington's life is a fascinating story. Bob, thanks a lot for the call. Terry in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Terry, what's up?
I am wondering if it is true, if you agree or accept premise or the idea that the Confederate States should have been allowed to vote on whatever the 13th and 14th Amendments, that since the Confederate States were not allowed, afforded the opportunity to vote for the amendments, that those amendments are not valid,
are not legitimate. That's the argument that has been made by white Southern racists for years and years, and twice Amy Coney Barrett in her writings or speaking referred to the possibly illegitimate 14th Amendment. And that's the reason why they consider it possibly illegitimate. What's your point, Terry?
Okay. Well, I was thinking if the Confederate felons, as I refer to them, should have their voting rights reinstated, does it not follow, for the sake of consistency, that current contemporary felons who've paid their debt to society should have their voting rights reinstated?
I think there's a difference between robbing a grocery store and committing treason by launching a revolution against your own country, a civil war against your own country.
Oh, yeah, that's great. But I was just trying to think, is this consistent? I mean, I believe that any felon who's paid their so-called debts to society and has been released on good, or being a good felon, if not released on good behavior, shouldn't their voting rights be reinstated?
And particularly if we claim that the purpose of our criminal justice system is to reintegrate people into society as new and better people, rather than just to beat the crap out of them and punish them. If we claim that, we should be doing that. We should, and I think that Maine is the only state in the union, and I may be wrong on this because I'm running on memory from this from almost 2 years ago when I wrote the book on the hidden history of the war on voting. But I'm pretty sure that in Maine you can vote in jail. But I don't think that's true of any other state. But there is one state, I think it's Maine, but there is one state where you can vote when you're in jail. And other states, mostly former Confederate states, because the law was used mostly against African Americans, to disenfranchise them in a whole variety of ways, to keep them out of the job market, as well as keeping them out of the voting cycle. You've got Confederate states where if you're a felon, you can't vote. And people are overturning those, as they did in Florida, although the Florida governor is doing everything he can to stop that. But I'm with you, Terry. Yeah. I think that people should, voting should be not just an obligation of citizenship, but also a right. It should be clearly established as a right for all citizens, and a right that you only lose if you commit treason against your country. If you take up arms against your country, as Benedict Arnold did and as the Confederates did in 1860 or 1861, if you do that, then you lose your vote. But otherwise, no. And I'm totally with you, and I think it's a good and important point. Terry, thank you for the call. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Tom, I wanted to talk about the Supreme Court. And before I do that, Tom, just quickly, The Matrix, one of my favorite movies, saw it many times, as well as the trilogy. I just want to say Sophie Stewart won her lawsuit. She was the originator of that treatment for that movie, and she's a black woman. And so I'd like for her to get her credit. You all can look that up, Sophie Stewart. But with the Supreme Court, with the Supreme Court, Tom, I want Biden and the Democratic Party to do whatever they can to bring fairness to the court. And if that means adding 13 justices in total, that's exactly what it means. Why is it, Tom, and I'll hang up and take this call, when we get the power, if Biden and Harris win, we're always hesitant about exercising the power. Well, maybe we should lay low. We shouldn't overplay our hand. We should do whatever it takes to make the lives of the people better. And once they see that, they will want more of it.
I'm completely with you, Pam. Lyndon Johnson knew how to use power. He knew how to threaten people. He knew how to dangle things in front of people. Carrots. He knew how to do the carrot and how to do the stick. Franklin Roosevelt knew how to use power. And I hope Joe Biden was 40 years in the Senate. I hope that as a result of that, he knows how to use power. He has certainly seen people use power in his career. And this is now no time to shrink away from that or to wimp out. Now is the time to step up and say, yes, they hate me and I welcome their hatred, as Franklin Roosevelt said. Or yes, we will do this or history will judge us poorly and nothing's going to stop us, as Lyndon Johnson said about the Civil Rights Act. This is what we have to do. I agree with you, Pam. Absolutely. Thank you so much. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. Back with more of your calls in just a minute.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the Thom Hartmann Program, speaking the truth to multinational corporations would really rather you didn't know all about. And welcome back. Let's see here. Daniel in Honolulu, Hawaii. Hey, Daniel, what's up?
Yes, Tom. Hope you're well. I read 3 of your books. Can you hear me?
Thank you. I do.
And
Thank you. There may be a slight delay between us, so just keep talking.
It was an intellectual pleasure to read those books, but I don't want to keep on praise. You're an intellect, so am I. And Screwed was the one that kind of stuck out. And I think you could write a sequel to that called Truly Screwed. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I'm sorry, the delay makes conversation awkward, but yeah, that's one of my favorite books. It still sells fairly well too. I mean, and that book came out in like 2005, I think, or something like that. I mean, I wrote that quite some time ago, but it's really a big picture book about how we got modern democracy and how basically Republicans hate modern democracy and how they screw the average person.
Well, I'm despairing now, I'll be honest with you, with this Supreme Court situation. I just don't see a way out of this, and I want to be an optimist, but I don't know. How do you feel? I don't know. Do you see a way out?
I think, Daniel, sometimes the very worst thing that can happen is the very biggest blessing. When Republicans were moving in the direction that they've been moving, which is to undo the New Deal and the Great Society, to undo the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, the right to unionize, Social Security. All of those things have been on the Republican hit list for years and years, but nobody ever took them seriously. And so people continue to vote for them, knowing that, on their agenda was destroying Social Security and Medicare, destroying the right of people to vote, et cetera, et cetera. But people just thought, they'll never actually do that. And, I kind of like the tax cuts, or they'll never actually do that. And I really don't think that abortion is such a good thing. And so people continue to vote for them. Now people are going to realize, or have realized, exactly what the Republicans are up to, how insane they really are. They really do believe this stuff that David Koch ran for president in 1980 on, and the whole idea that humans are evil people who need to be constrained by the iron fist of state, a church of state. They actually believe this stuff, and I think that if the Supreme Court starts radically knocking down legislation in the next few months, I think that may be a really good thing, because it's going to wake the country the hell up. What do you think, Daniel?
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, you're welcome. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's remarkable to me how when things are, it's the frog in the pot, right? As things are warming up and warming up and warming up, we just kind of, look at an interesting show on TV, or there's a squirrel. It's like we're all kind of ADD. We're not quite paying attention as the water's getting warmer and warmer and warmer, and at a certain point, it's either too hot to jump out of, or it's hot enough that we're going, whoa, what the hell? And out we go. And I think that we're within 6 months of that point of, either we're going to go, whoa, and get out of this water and do something about this 40-year Republican campaign to turn America from a democracy into an autocracy, or they're going to get away with it, in which case we're going to start looking like Belarus a year or two from now. and eventually we'll work our way back to democracy. That's how I believe it's going to play out. Anyhow, back with your calls in just a minute. Stick around. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. So we need to be thinking right now about how to Trump-proof the presidency in the future. I mean, Donald Trump is causing all kinds of chaos and disasters, and things are, frankly, I think, going to get much worse before they get better. And I don't think they're going to get better until after January 21st or January, noon on January 20th. And that's assuming that, absolute craziness doesn't happen. But, there's a bunch of steps that we need to take, from recalibrating or fixing how we do our elections, to fixing how we handle money in politics, to fixing the pardon power of the presidency, to specifically saying that if a president is found to be a criminal, he or she can still be held to account. I mean, just straightforward stuff. And we need to be getting ready to do this. I lay it all out in a new video for people who support our program that you can find over at thomhartmann.com. It is 9 minutes before the top of the hour. Thom Hartmann with you. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I've been thinking about something that in my career as a procurement officer, once at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the scientists ran out of something that was a disaster created by nature. It was called force majeure or force majeure. And we couldn't get any of the exhaust that is created in China by all of the cars because the bird flu caused a shortage of exhaust. So force majeure, which is the concept of an act of God, an event for which no party can be held accountable, versus a man-made event. So Trump and the Trump administration caused the intentional slowdown of the USPS, and a force majeure, which now universally has applied to actually 3 tests that it actually fits are as applied. Whether a force majeure defense is applicable, the event must be unforeseeable, external, and irresistible. And I'm wondering if Congress could absolutely say, we are declaring one or the other. Trump caused this. It's a man-made event. That could have been helped, but we're not blaming him. Force majeure, which is a pandemic, a hurricane, a volcanic eruption, things like that, nobody really can be blamed for that. Okay?
Well, yeah, at law. I mean, it's a legal term that is inserted into most contracts to say that,
it's a universal concept.
An act of God we're not responsible for. But what's your point, Lori?
My point is that we have always forgiven any neighborhood, any community that's had a hurricane or any kind of a catastrophe. We have forgiven the date for the elections. We pushed it back in order to accommodate those people that had a force majeure. And we're not doing that right now. No,
I get that. And in fact, that was part of the argument that Brett Kavanaugh shot down along with 4 other justices, 5 right-wing cranks on the Supreme Court yesterday, saying that Wisconsin voters don't get to have their vote won't be counted if it arrives after Election Day, even if it's postmarked before Election Day. And they were ignoring exactly what you're pointing out, that we've got this act of God, in quotes, this force majeure, of the coronavirus. And Elena Kagan pointed that out in her dissent, by the way. She raised holy hell about it. But Lori, spot on. Thank you for the call. Ben in Chicago. Hey, Ben, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to say, you mentioned that our work is not done simply because we voted. And I totally agree with you. I actually used that site that you've been mentioning on your program. I think it's findyourcongressman.com. And
contactmypolitician.com.
Thank you. ContactMyPolitician.com. And I encourage people to do that. It's very easy to use, and it takes you directly to your congressman or whomever you want to get in contact with, and just, strongly voice your opinion on the disdain for what's happened. The ramming through who I call Amy Phony Barrett, and it's just been absolutely crazy. But that's not the reason for my call. I was wondering, and while I was on the phone with your screener, I think someone was answering this, but I didn't quite hear. You were talking about adding 2 more justices to the seats there, and I just wonder if we do that and those other seats are still open. The other seats are still open. If the Republicans get back into power, presidentially or otherwise, can they just fill those other seats that are open?
It depends on how it's done. And one way to make it seem less partisan, Ben, would be to say, okay, we're going to take the court from its current 9 up to 15, for example. But we're going to, in the law, we're going to specify that the addition of justices will occur at the rate of 1 per year until the court is filled up. And that way, or one every other year until the court is filled up. And that way it's not all happening for Joe Biden, right? So it's not just obviously a naked power grab. And, if the next election 4 years from now is, if Kamala Harris is the top of the ticket, which is what I fully expect, assuming that Joe Biden wins the election, which is, again, knock wood, keep saying your prayers and keep working. But,
right,
if that happens, and now we got Tom Cotton, a neo-fascist in the Republican Party, rising star, who's already planning for 2024 to run for president on the Republican side. That would make a very, very interesting race, but there's a lot at stake here. But I think that there's ways to do this that will not seem quite as partisan, that will actually seem like what we're actually trying to do is make the court work better for all Americans. Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, independent, libertarian, whatever it may be. But we'll see. We'll see. It's going to depend as much on you and me as anything else, because these politicians do react to us. They do look for the parade, and then they jump out in front of it and hoist their flag and say, this is my parade. So it's our job is to create that parade. Tag you're it, right? Have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. Be good to yourself and people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of shopping for insurance. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Help. More info at teethhealth.com, code TOM. HelloFresh, delivering fresh ingredients and mouthwatering recipes. More info at hellofresh.com, code TOM. Bowl and Branch, crafted for the common good. More information at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More info at expressvpn.com/Tom. And CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!